And I guess what I'm trying to do with this conversation is to humanize those that I am opposed to. How do we get around that political tension? Those that are on the Democratic side have a different view of the role of government, and you might feel that they're wrong in that, but it's not that they're less faithful. In 2020, I feel like it kind of swapped. Prior to that, most of the highly conservative people were all happy with the positions the church took, but there were some liberal aspects that didn't. And then 2020 hit, and the church was fairly like, vaccinations are good, and, do your part for the community COVID. And do the stuff with COVID. And all of the highly conservative people were like,
what?
Really offended by the church at what happened there. And that's why I think the church's primary role is to change individual hearts and let those individual hearts then change the world. And President Oakes has said on political issues, you need to make these choices of your own free will and choice, that the church does support things. And in the grand scheme of things, the church has to do a little pruning here and a little grafting here and here, and there's going to be some sore spots here as it's like building the church and helping it grow. But that we need not be overly worked up, I don't think, when the church states something that we don't feel like quite jives with the way that we view it. And I think that we can still be very active, faithful members of the church as long as we're holding to the core doctrines and teachings of the church.
Our politics are determining our religion and our faith, and it should be the other way around.
We all can agree, like, it's bad to kill babies, but whether you or I decide, the government should definitely be regulating that, or the government should not be regulating that, to me, that's a completely different moral question. I'm telling you, we're going to see more and more diversity of application of gospel principles than we've seen before. Some good and a lot really bad. Where I think we need to be careful, though, and the whole premise of this conversation, is that what we should preach is the sanctity of life.
Yes.
Not the political version of that.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's No Bushel Podcasts. We are your hosts, Big Ben and the Burning Bushman. And we are excited to get to our new discussion this week,
which is going to be offensive. We're going to be talking about abortion. So, specifically, pro-choice. And can you be a faithful Latter-day Saint and still be pro-choice? You might have strong feelings on it. You might not. But this is something, so, and I actually think that this conversation is going to carry over a little bit more into other political actions that are moral in nature, and the role that the church has played versus the role that individuals play, and what we should feel good or not good about. So if you're interested, stay along with us.
Yeah, like and subscribe and share with your friends and family, and let's jump into it, shall we?
Sounds good.
So the premise of the question is, because maybe we should start with the church's stance on abortion so that we can have a little bit of clarity there, that the church is, in general, against abortions. There are some key exceptions to the abortion rule, which would be in the case of rape or incest, and when the life of the mother or health of the mother is at risk. And there's one more that I'm totally blanking on right now.
I think those are the only three.
Is that's it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple of key exceptions there, but that I think in general, a lot of people that are pro-life typically align themselves with those exceptions. And the question is, can you be okay with and support the pro-choice movement that is okay with abortion at any point, rather than just in those key exceptions?
So that's interesting how you define the pro-choice movement. So I would actually not define the pro-choice movement as no boundaries.
Yes.
I would say that I guess there's a continuum, right? And so, even the church's stance is a somewhat liberal stance. You could say that the pro-life movement doesn't actually allow for the
Sure.
exceptions
Yeah.
in many cases, and then the far side of the pro-choice movement being, no restrictions, and there are so the church comes in a little bit. I would say that the general pro-choice side is okay, and it kind of gets to the older side of pro-choice was, rare but safe, right? Like they didn't want lots of abortions, but it was, rare, but they wanted it to be safe for people, and so they legalized some. And then there's been kind of recently where it's been very like, it's good to kill babies, and that's
Right. disturbing,
right? And so
Yes.
So maybe we do need to kind of qualify what we mean by pro-choice, but just one's, I guess where I view it is the role that the government plays. And I guess the government is playing a role either in saying no abortions, or people have their choice to commit an abortion or not. Right? Like it's actually kind of strange if you think about it, because the pro-life movement typically is a conservative principle, and conservatives are typically less government. And yet this is one of those cases where they're actually asking for government intervention.
Right.
Whereas the pro-life, the pro-choice movement tends to be very liberal, where they want more government intervention, and this is actually a place where they're saying, get rid of the government, which is a little bit funny, isn't it?
It is kind of ironic that the reversal of roles, which we've talked about in the past, right? The reversal of roles there. So I guess maybe I should get some more clarity on your end as far as for today's discussion and argument's sake, what specifically so we're talking about, can you be a member of the LDS Church in good standing, good faith, an active member, if you are not...
And believe that women should have the choice of whether they have an abortion or not.
Okay.
So I've struggled with that in the past, of like, it just hasn't made sense to me. And fairly recently, I feel like I've like parsed it out enough to make sense of it.
Okay.
Which is kind of why I was interested in talking about this. Because, and let me be very clear. So I am vehemently pro-life from a personal and political standpoint. I, the church leaves room for exceptions. I actually lean towards no exceptions. Yeah. With life of the mother being the only exception I would consider. Even in that case, I think it would be hard, depending on the circumstances. And I think those are super, super rare. So I hope that's just never an issue.
Yeah.
But as I've been thinking about this and thinking about the individual variability, like, we are all rooted in core doctrine. And that is, life is sacred. And we also have core doctrines around agency and choice and accountability. And I guess where we dumb things down to the labels, and in politics, we put our political title ahead of our spiritual titles, right? Like our how we identify. So we often talk about, first and foremost, we are children of God, we are disciples of Jesus Christ, and we are children of the covenant. And sometimes we let our political identities get ahead of us. So in this realm, I think it's not uncommon for someone to say, that someone could feel or think, well, I'm totally pro-life, and that makes me a good member of the church because I support life. Does that make sense? Yeah. Whereas somebody who might be pro-choice but is a member of I keep getting pro-choice. Somebody who's pro-choice, who's a member of the church, might also feel like they're a good member of the church and they're holding to core doctrines and they're trying to apply gospel principles in their way. But from a political standpoint, that's where the differentiation of the role that government plays in our life versus the role of what my faith tells me to do on an individual level.
Sure.
And does the church actually say anywhere that the church defines what the government should do and that we should vote for that?
No.
Right?
As far as I'm aware.
everything I've seen is the church is politically neutral, and they teach correct principles and let members govern themselves.
Yeah. On very rare occasions, the church will come out and support a political, like a law or a policy, but never, not as far as I'm aware, no like full on political.
So that exact point, can the church back whatever it is, political thing, and as a member, can you disagree with what the church is doing
question.
while still holding to your core principles and doctrine and being an active, faithful member of the church?
Right.
Like maybe that's the root of what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
There's a handful of cases of this. Early on prohibition, the church was vehemently encouraging people to vote for prohibition. We know that didn't win out. And in fact, the president of the church was, I think it was Grant. After the vote went through, he had some pretty stirring words, and that's actually when the word of wisdom became law for going to the temple.
Interesting.
Was when prohibition did
not realize that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so just like interesting things that with abortion, the church kind of has a generic policy statement, but they haven't. I don't think I don't know that there've been any like specific policies that they've put their full weight behind.
Sure. Yeah.
But they kind of have their generic statement, and so I guess I could say, knowing that my individual political stance is that I would rather vote for things that don't allow the exceptions. Does that put me just as out of tune with the church doctrine or the church policy in government as somebody who is pro-choice?
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Because you're, by voting for something without exceptions, it's
still not in line with what the church
in line with what
said,
the church says. Yeah.
And I don't think so. I think
I would not agree with that.
And that's where parsing out what our faith tells us to do on an individual level and to promote life, that I can promote life. So I'm just going to play the devil's advocate here, and I'm going to pretend I'm not pro-life, okay?
Okay.
Politically pro-life, okay? I might have a family member who gets impregnated, and they're coming to me and they want an abortion. And I want to preserve that life. I have great compassion for that baby, and I want that mother to keep that baby. And I can guide them and love them and help them through that process. And let's say that there was no law, there wasn't, like the government was not a thing. Would I physically force that person to not have an abortion if they chose and were adamant to have that abortion? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And when you dumb it down to that circumstance, obviously there's a slight difference between individuals and a government and like the roles. And so,
right.
But when you put it down to that circumstance, like you can be pro-life and still honor someone else's
agency to make that choice.
To make that choice, since it does reside within them and it is living on them, right? Like it is a full baby, but it is also cannot survive without the mother. And so while I would disagree with the person having an abortion, how I apply that in a pluralistic society with lots of different people can be very different. And I think that we need to allow members the space to view things differently politically and how the government should apply certain things, while we're all still kind of holding to the core doctrines and principles of the gospel. We still are advocating for life on an individual and personal level. I'm not going to, and this, so the difference between apostate, because I think some people would say, oh, if you're pro-choice, you're apostate. You're just, you want babies to be killed. And it's like, no, I don't want babies to be killed. I would love it if abortion was limited. Now, on the flip side, if somebody did come, at what point does it become apostasy? If somebody's on that side. And
so you, in your argument there, though, you said something that I think is interesting, because I think you took a a pro-choice stance and said that someone's arguing against that was, well, you just want to kill babies, and he said, well, no, I would love for abortions to be limited, and I don't think that that's necessarily
It's not
the
by
case.
by all pro-choice people.
I think that there are some people, but in general, at least in today's version of the abortion, the context of the abortion argument, I think that, and we should specify that it's the pro-life version, the pro-life side of it that you and I belong to, that we feel fairly strongly about. Sometimes, and both sides do this, we can say things that get at the emotional side of the argument. So, like, we can say, well, you're killing babies, which is what they're is what abortion is. But if we say, well, to a pro-choice person, all you're wanting to do is to kill babies, I don't think that that's actually, like, they're not having an abortion just to kill a baby. They're having an abortion because of the choice of the mother, and like there's other things that go into their argument. And so sometimes we can say something that I don't necessarily. I think we apply generalities and general, very emotional things that bring up these emotions in us to apply to the other side, the other argument, that sometimes don't actually apply to the individual person that we are discussing that with.
Absolutely. There are generalities. And we do dehumanize the other side.
Yes.
The pro-life
so.
and the pro-choice, they both dehumanize the other side when you're on the outskirts. And I guess what I'm trying to do with this conversation is to humanize those that I am opposed to. I think I have, in the past, dehumanized the other side. And you're right. From our view, it feels like abortion is being celebrated and lauded by everybody on the left right now. And I also have to push back on that natural tendency to think that. I do know there are people that are applauding it.
Yes.
Is it the majority of people on the left applauding it? I don't know that. I hope that it's not. Maybe it is. And because we are, firmly kind of staunch on our side, like it can feel like
I think we can apply that to ourselves, and then sometimes we have those generalities that we just assume that aren't always accurate. So it's good to have that self-reflection. Be like, hold on, let me back up just a minute and make sure that we're on the same page.
And as Latter-day Saints in the community that we worship with, it's very, very common for the vast majority of people to be pro-life.
Right.
And because of that, we don't associate with too many people that are pro-choice. And so those that are pro-choice probably feel very uncomfortable in that setting.
Sure.
And all I'm saying is we need to humanize them. We need to understand. And the same thing goes for conservative versus, Republican versus Democrat, right? Like they're vastly more Republican Latter-day Saints than there are Democrats. And the Democrats are sometimes very vocal and sometimes not. And they make everything feel a little awkward when sometimes they do, right? Because there's this like political tension, and I'm just trying to figure out like how do we get around that political tension, and it goes back to how we identify and the core root and principles, and we need to be humble enough to recognize that those that are on the Democratic side, they are also tied to the same core doctrine and principles that we are.
Sure.
They just have a different view of the role of government, and you might feel that they're wrong in that. That's fine. You can believe that they're wrong in it, but it's not that they're less faithful.
Sure. Well, and I mean, you can apply this to a lot of different topics too. Just because somebody has a problem with one particular doctrine or policy does not mean that they no longer have a testimony of anything else in the church either, right? Like we each have our own struggles with different things. And that's why nobody's perfect. We all have different issues that we have to deal with and work through. And so to say that just because someone has, they're for abortions and are promoting it does not mean that they can't also have a testimony of Jesus Christ and a testimony of the Book of Mormon and all these things. They have some things that they got to work through to come to like a full, to put their will with God's will. But I think that we sometimes say, because you have this problem, everything else that's good in your life can no longer be in conjunction with that. For instance, like someone that smokes or drinks alcohol that's against the word of wisdom can still have a testimony of the Book of Mormon and can still have a testimony that Jesus Christ is their Savior, and knowing that that's the case can help them work through getting to a point where they can be as one with God.
True, but are they in good standing in the church?
So, and I think
Maybe
there's
what does that even mean?
right. So we're kind of getting into. I think we're having a couple different conversations within the same conversations here, because we can. You can be a member of the church and support abortion. You can be a member of the church and be gay. You can be a member of the church and be a heavy drinker, and like, we have plenty of people in the church that are these things, but can you be, I think maybe what we're getting at is, can you be an active member with like a temple recommend that can be worthy to hold a calling and be in the temple? Because when I think of like someone in good standing with the church, I think, do you have an active temple recommend?
I think of active temple recommend, but I mean, some of those things that you brought up, I recognize that there are members that are in each of those positions. However, if you've had an abortion or you're living in a same-sex relationship, those are grounds for disfellowship and or losing membership.
But there's a difference between supporting it and actively acting on it. So, for instance, like, let me go to like the homosexual conversation.
Yes.
Someone can be gay, but not in a homosexual relationship.
Yes.
And still be an active member of the church, or even not even active, just can be a member of the church. And I think that's what I'm getting at. Is you can have these thoughts or these tendencies or feel a certain way. It's the actions that are going to be what can potentially be a problem with the church, with your standing. So if you're actively promoting abortion, then I would say that is against what church doctrine.
Or if you're actively saying that you can get sealed to someone of the same sex in the temple, or if you're like advocating for that against the policy and doctrine of the church, then that puts you out of and there are lots of members that feel that things should go certain ways or not ways, and there can be a lot of different viewpoints. And
what's interesting is because we talk about, because we're mixing politics and church with this conversation a lot, which can be confusing and weird,
and why we're going to offend a lot of you. You're welcome.
But nowhere in the temple recommend questions is it, did you vote for this bill, or are you a Democrat or a Republican, or are you and I'm not advocating for that to be the case. I think that there's a reason that your voting is designed to be individual and kept to yourself. But when talking about church doctrines and policies that you are actively against or promoting, then that's when questions like the temple recommend questions will come into play, and we have to be honest with the way that we're answering those questions.
Do you support or promote any practices, teachings, or doctrines contrary? It doesn't say government policies, and I think it's related to the church. And so we had talked about a few specific examples of the church, and this is where I think people can feel conflicted, or people can feel that like they might see other members of the church advocating for policies that seem to be out of line with what the church. So, for example, marijuana. So the church was fairly, at least in the Utah area, and this is also kind of weird because the church is kind of centered out of Utah, and so Utah is like the framework, and the church is much more active in the politics of Utah.
Sure,
but the church is really not at the federal level. I mean, besides Prop 8, I don't know that the church has really done much at the federal level.
There really has not been.
And then outside of that, has the church done anything in other countries from a political standpoint? Like, I don't know. So we within the United States have kind of a unique view of how the church involves with politics that the rest of the world probably doesn't
Might have a little bit different view.
understand or see. But I know that in Utah, the church was firmly against legalization of marijuana, and that recently passed here a little while ago. And I know very prominent, very active Latter-day Saints who were actually fighting against the church in those policy statements. And that seems like a weird place to be.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that I would, personally, I would have to take some very serious introspection and prayer and, decision making to go against, because in one respect you could say, well, you should follow the prophets, right? And so it's a form of following the prophet if the prophet is leading the church to take some stance on some moral value of some sort. But on the other side of the coin, the application of governance is very different than what the church's primary role of, which is distilling faith, hope, and charity into each individual's heart.
Bring people to Christ.
Yeah. So marijuana was one recently, and in Utah there was another one I was thinking about. So we had prohibition, abortion, Prop 8 was a big one because lots of members got involved with Prop 8.
Was like, at least in my lifetime, that's the big one that I remember. It was huge. I mean, that was nationwide.
Yeah. And then a lot of the policy things. So many of the policy things that 90% of the church membership kind of backed and was supportive of, but then you had the fraction of people who really didn't like that the church was taking a political view on certain things. In 2020, I feel like it kind of swapped, because prior to that, most of the things, it was like the highly conservative people were all happy with the positions the church took, but there were some liberal aspects that didn't. And then 2020 hit, and the church was fairly like, vaccinations are good, and do your part for the community COVID. And do the stuff with COVID. And all of the highly conservative people were like,
what?
Really offended by the church at what happened there. And that's why I think the church's primary role is to change individual hearts and let those individual hearts then change the world. But the church is a worldwide organization. And when you're running a worldwide organization, when it asks you to do something, it can seem political, even if it's not political. If that makes sense, and I think we need to stem back to what the church repeatedly says, is that we let people govern. We teach correct principles and let individuals decide. And specifically in President Oaks has said on political issues, like you need to make these choices of your own free will and choice. That the church does support things, and in the grand scheme of things, that the church, it will, it has to do a little pruning here and a little grafting here and here, and there's going to be some sore spots here as it's like building the church and helping it grow. But that we need not be overly worked up, I don't think, as far as how our local government is functioning, when the church states something that we don't feel like quite jives with the way that we view it. And I think that we can still be very active, faithful members of the church, as long as we're holding to the core doctrines and teachings of the church.
Well, and then I have a couple of different thoughts here, and so we'll see if I can remember all of them by the time I finish this first one. One of the articles of faith in the church is that we believe in living and abiding by the laws of the land, right? We believe that wherever you live, you should live according to those laws. And what's interesting about this debate, especially abortion, is even if the law of the land is that anybody can get an abortion at any point, does not mean that you have to get an abortion. And so if the law was anybody can do it, as a Christian and as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it is not only just church doctrine and policy that you don't get an abortion, but you don't have to go get an abortion just because the law allows you to get an abortion.
Mhm.
So I think sometimes with this argument we can say it's either all or nothing, and we forget that from a government perspective, sure, that can apply, but from our faith-building perspective, just because the law says one thing, as long as we are abiding by the law, we still don't have to. We don't have to do something that goes against our faith and our morals, which is important. I think that kind of ties into what you're getting at, is that we can agree with different doctrines and philosophies, or not doctrines, philosophies from a political standpoint, but still be able to hold to our own morals and values. Now, I will say, and I think that this is also important to note, that while we are a worldwide church and we are bringing in people from tons of different backgrounds and histories and cultures and whatnot, that does not mean that the church's values and doctrines change just because we're bringing someone from a totally different area of the world or background or whatever. The doctrine is a doctrine, and the church's stance is no abortions. There are a couple of key exceptions that we've already mentioned, but in general, no abortion. And so you may have these, from a political standpoint, you can be okay with, I think you can support typically it's a Democrat, right? That you can be a Democrat, vote Democrat, and still be a member of the church, knowing that the church is against abortion. But I think it's when you go out of your way to promote abortions and say you should go get an abortion, or you should let's take everybody to the Planned Parenthood building, and whatever it is. If you're promoting that is a different thing from voting for your Democrat president at the next presidential election. So I think it's important for us to recognize that there are differences, but we still do have to hold our ground when it comes to what we believe in as a church.
Absolutely. But I think that's where the confusion comes in for a lot of people, is they automatically align political identity with their spiritual identity.
Yes.
And so if you are voting for a Democrat, or you are not even super pro-choice, but let's just say like you're a fairly moderate, like you believe in like an 8-week ban or something, right? Like an abortion is totally fine in the first 8 weeks, and then after that it's, or 16 weeks, 60, I think 16 weeks is the part. Or some do like a 20.
It changes all the time. I never remember where we're
different
at.
people push for different month bans or whatnot. And so, as many abortions as possible, or as many abortions are legal in the first half. Now that doesn't mean I can vote for that and still not want people to have abortions in that first gap. But it's a stopgap measure. It relieves some one political pressure on both sides, and even though I don't agree with it and don't like it, I can see how someone else would be. Okay.
Well, I mean, here's your argument for it: is if the bill right now, the law is any abortion anytime, and the bill that's being presented is there's going to be a limit at, we'll say 20 weeks. Well, I'd rather have at least a limit on 20 weeks than nothing at all, right? If that's what your options are. So I could see people voting for that, at least to make that progress. Even if I'm not necessarily wanting abortions at all, the currently, I think you can see where that connection can be made.
From someone that's from someone that's believes in soul, like where I guess I'm just saying that the government side of it should be totally separated from the individual nature of it.
Mm-hmm. And that's where I think we have come to a problem with today's political world. And I'm going to forget her name. Is she on the Blaze? She spoke at Turning Point. There,
Beth Stuckey,
it might have been her. Anyway, whoever it was, I'll have to find it.
Allie Beth Stuckey
Said, and I'm going to totally butcher it, but basically what she said, there was a 17, 18-year-old guy that had come to her event and said, I'm a Christian and I want to be politically aware but I also want to be a pastor. And how do I preach things that are morally good that seem to have this political issues? And what she said is, we have gotten to the point where our politics, and you alluded to this earlier, our politics are determining our religion and our faith, and it should be the other way around. Our faith should be determining what our political outlooks are. And if we allow politics and our government to be what we live our life by, rather than our relationship with Christ and our faith, then we're always going to have contradictions and we're always going to have this confusion. But if you can live your life through your relationship with Christ and your faith with Him, following the guidance of church doctrines and policies, that confusion and the confusion will be much less so, and you will have clarity. You will have that light back with you.
So another kind of topic on this, which is kind of an interesting one, because culturally we can, as a people, be okay with some things and not okay with other things,
Mm-hmm.
and like change laws on things. So a lot of libertarians really don't want like any, much less government intervention. And so I've seen several strong debates about the regulation of prostitution. Okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
So prostitution, obviously, is a terrible thing. And I think most people
Would agree with that.
would agree
Yeah.
that it's not a good thing.
Hopefully you agree with that.
But I've seen very interesting debates back and forth about the pros and cons
Mm-hmm.
of, and I've seen this also with drugs too, where it's like, okay, certain drugs, like, is it better to keep it out in the open or to put it on the black market?
Right.
And that when it's on the black market, sometimes it actually blows up even worse than if it's just somewhat regulated. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's where, like, we're all against prostitution, but where you're at on that, like, I don't fully understand it, and I don't know.
But should the government be regulating it?
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I guess I would just apply the same thing to abortion. Like we all can agree, like, it's bad to kill babies. But whether you or I decide, yeah, the government should definitely be regulating that, or the government should not be regulating that, to me, that's a completely different moral question.
Sure.
Even though we lump them into the same thing, I think, in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all learning, and that's why you can kind of change your view and mode of things over time as you learn what works and doesn't work. And oftentimes we have to rely on classical history to see how things have worked in the past and how things didn't work in the past.
Sure.
And there's, like, you have that's the whole framework of the democracy of the republic that we live in, was born on the history of people who had gone before. They looked up some of the wisest people from history they could look at, and the best civilizations they could look at, and tried to form, something that would function and keep freedom as long as possible. And sometimes we're so narrow-minded nowadays we have so much information at our fingertips, and yet we're so narrow-minded that we don't always see what the consequences of an action. So like marijuana. So marijuana is an easy one because we've seen very quickly what's happened. So I remember before marijuana was legalized everywhere, the people that were advocating for it were like, okay, this is not that bad of a drug.
Mm-hmm.
It it's worse. It's not as bad as alcohol. Alcohol affects people more than this drug does, and alcohol is legal. So why don't we keep this legal? It's on the black market. People are still getting it, but it's not regulated. So now they're just going crazy with it. And so let's regulate it. Let's get some money with it. To we give money to the schools for it.
Schools.
We can do all these things, right?
It's always to the school. So,
and at least from my experience, I don't know if everyone else's experience is like this, but society has like tanked since marijuana was legalized. I mean, there are so many dispensaries, like they just pop up everywhere. Yep. And I can't tell you the number of people I know who are debilitated because of marijuana use that would not have been otherwise. And so like, I could see the arguments before, and I could see how an honest person trying to do what's right would argue one way or another. But based on the fruit of what's happened, looking back, I'm like, kind of glad I didn't vote for that.
Well, I mean, you can justify yourself into anything, right? There's a phrase about justification. It's something along the lines of justification is just a brick in the long road to hell, or something like that, where we can justify that we're going to do something because it's better than something else or not as bad as something else, but it's still bad. It's still, you still shouldn't be doing it, and there's lots of different things in life that are like that. Maybe
the root of our entire discussion was actually the wrong question. Maybe the root of our discussion should have been, should we judge people who choose to be pro-choice or pro-life as inadequate members of the church? Does that make sense? And I guess the question should be, the answer should be, what we're aiming for here is we should focus on our own roots. We should strive to grow the roots of others, but we should also be forgiving and full of grace for where people are, and not view them as terrible people who are wanting to hurt the world. Most of the time, they're still good people striving to do what's right. And as the church goes on, I'm telling you, we're going to see more and more diversity of application of gospel principles than we've seen before. Some good and a lot really bad. And we talk about the parable of the 10 virgins and the second coming. And the 10 virgins, they were covenant keepers. They were the ones, and only half of them made it to the wedding feast. Yep. Which, if you think about that, it's kind of sad. Like, next time I don't know, I guess you can, is that covenant keepers as in like baptized members? 50% of baptized members? Or is that like covenant keepers, like every time you go to the temple, think half these people are going to be in the wedding feast, Like we need to worry more about ourselves and less about the choices of others. Teach correct principles, let people govern themselves.
Yeah. Amen.
There you go.
So here's just a quick fun thought for you, just before we wrap things up. When's the last time you heard an abortion talk in sacrament meeting?
I've been thinking about this. I have been.
I mean, I know you're bishop, so you can ask somebody to.
Well, I could, and I have. Just earlier today, in preparation for this, I was reading Elder Anderson's from General Conference 2 or 3 conferences ago. And he's specifically says, we should talk about this.
Yeah. I think that it's worth asking the question. Yeah. I think that it's not discussed because it is a hot button topic. And I'd be curious to know what the reaction would be from congregations if someone from the pulpit was actually promoting something that the church promotes, which is no abortions.
So this is where I think we need to be careful, though, and the whole premise of this conversation is that what we should preach is the sanctity of life.
Yes.
Not the political
correct
version of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because then we're putting politics before spirituality.
And I agree with that.
But teaching, and as I read through Elder Anderson's talk with this concept in mind, I actually heard it very differently. It's amazing how sometimes you'll hear things in church and something is said, but you mishear it. You hear it totally differently, right? Like, I was talking with somebody the other day, and we were talking about godly sorrow, sorry, not godly sorrow. We were talking about having a broken heart. So the scriptures talk about how it's important to have a broken heart and a contrite spirit. And in my mind, that's like humility. Mm-hmm. Well, this person was telling me they hated that word. I was like, I hate that word. Like, what does a broken heart mean to you? And they're like, guilt. And so every time someone says a broken heart in church, they're thinking guilt. Mm-hmm. And to me, I was like, that's not what it means. Like, and so like
we all have our own interpretations.
Sometimes you can mishear things. And when I had first heard his talk, there were several things I noticed. He tried to be not political, but still there were some things that kind of came across as political. And when I read it this time, I was like, he's not making any statements politically. Mm-hmm. All of his statements are just about the sanctity of life and how we need to cherish life and support life and help people to not want to destroy life.
Yeah.
And so how you apply that in the political scheme is up to you. And I think most people will probably choose to be on that pro-life side of that argument. But I just think that we shouldn't, at first glance, behead the person who is
sure
thinks there should be some exceptions.
And like always, we should be welcoming everybody into the church, regardless of what they are thinking or feeling or believing or whatever their background is. Christ welcomed everybody to come to Him, as we should as well. We may not agree on everything. The church is not for perfect people. The church is for a wide variety of people that have totally different ideas and backgrounds. And so I think that you hit the nail on the head specifically with the point on we should be more concerned with our own individual faith and concerned with our own closeness to God rather than others, while still helping to love and invite others to come unto Christ without judgment.
And supporting and promoting the sanctity of life can mean joining a political movement of pro-life, but it can mean a lot of other things too. Mm-hmm. And I think in a lot of people's minds, that's the only thing it means. If you're going to support the sanctity of life, then you must be pro-life. And there's a lot more to it than that. And we need to focus on that, not the political aspect. We need to focus on the core basic tenets and doctrines of the church. And that's what should be taught. I think the reason that we fear, I think me as a bishop, like, I would be really afraid to assign someone that topic.
Mm-hmm. It's the type of topic you'd want to have to, like, give yourself, because
exactly.
You can control what's actually said rather than giving someone free reign on the
podium. Don't know what's going to be said sometimes, Yeah, very true.
Yeah. Well, good. I think this has been productive.
Yeah.
It's good conversation here. I agree. We need to focus on the core, the base root of those doctrines, which is life is important. God gave us life. He gives us life. He gives our children life, and we are a vessel for that life in some cases, and we should respect that, while also learning how to live in our society as a whole with governments and other people that have different ideas and views as us.
Which is a part of becoming a peacemaker. Like our prophet has admonished us to be peacemakers. It's far easier to enjoy watching the hate as people battle out. and I'm all for civil debate in debating ideas and the best ideas and letting people debate those in a civil way.
Mm-hmm.
But far too much of what's out there is purely clickbait
Yeah.
to just enjoy your side winning.
To get you to hate the other side more.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
For sure.
Well, thanks for watching, guys. This is the No Bushel Podcast.
We'll see you next time.